Okay, so I was just talking through how the Statue of Liberty has a new museum that I visited last summer, and it's this building at the back with the US flag. And as I was going through the museum, I stumbled upon this exhibit of scalar models that were study models for the lead up to the Statue of Liberty herself. And it caught my eye because the study models looked vaguely Middle Eastern. So I explored it further, and I discovered that Frédéric Auguste Bartholdi, who's the original sculptor of the Statue of Liberty, actually made these after his trip to Egypt, and it was for a monument for Egypt called Egypt Carrying the Light to Asia. So what I discovered, this is Auguste Bartholdi. He was born in 1834, and he traveled through Egypt when he was 21 years old. It was a year-long trip that traversed Egypt through Europe. And while he was in Egypt, he discovered the Abu Simbel monuments and just fell completely in love with the scale of them, the monumentality of them. And they never really left his imagination. Coupled with that, he was doing daily sketches of just, watercolors of everyday scenes in the Middle East that he was witnessing, people going to the markets, people walking in the streets. And he was so intrigued and inspired by Middle Eastern culture that he actually ran out of supplies. I photographed this quote from the exhibit that said that Bartholdi produced so many figural studies on his trip to the Middle East that he ran out of supplies. In one letter, he asked a friend to send 150 half sheets of paper, silver nitrate, 12 tubes of white paint, 6 of burnt sienna pins, etc., and erasers, just to show how prolific he was during this time in Egypt in his 20s. Fast forward about 15 years, the Suez Canal is conceived. I'm not sure how many of you know about the Suez Canal, but just to give you a quick overview, it's a canal that was built to connect the Red Sea to the Mediterranean, which shaved about 20 days off of the shipping routes that had to traverse the continent prior to that. So it was a huge, both feat of engineering, but also of transportation and, the speeding up of shipping routes and connecting the world, like the early stages of globalization. So the person that was overseeing this project was Ismail Pasha, or Ismail the Magnificent, who was born in 1830. And he and Bartholdi were friends because he studied in Paris. And so when the time came to conceive of a monument to inaugurate the Suez Canal, he reached out to Bartholdi and asked him to propose an idea. And so combining his impression of the monumental scale of the Abu Simbel sculptures with his watercolor studies of peasant life in the Middle East, he developed this sculpture, and you can already see the traces of what will lead to the Statue of Liberty. She sits on a high base. She has her foot forward. She's carrying a beacon, and the beacon represents enlightenment. And he called this the monument as a freed Egyptian slave, symbolic of progress and democratic rule, which was a little bit ironic at the time because slavery was rampant under this Egyptian Khedive, but that's not the image that he wanted to portray of Egypt. So they sort of went down this road for a while, but ultimately, after 10 years of digging by 1.5 million laborers, the proposal was rejected for cost reasons. Instead, a lighthouse was erected in Port Said in 1869, which itself was really interesting from a construction and structural perspective because it was showcasing the recent invention of reinforced concrete. But as we can see from this image, it doesn't really compare to the image that is seared in our minds of the Statue of Liberty. Bartholdi didn't waste any time. He begins his search for another location for his monument, and he finds fertile ground in America, which is celebrating 100 years as an independent nation. And I don't know if any of you know this story, but as he was scouting potential locations, he actually started with Central Park. So there was, a version of the Statue of Liberty that was going to be in Central Park. And then when that was rejected, he thought about Prospect Park in Brooklyn before finally landing on what was then Bedloe Island, which is where it currently stands today. And so this is his rendering of the Statue of Liberty repurposed on this island, and also rebranded the Roman goddess Libertas, goddess of free slaves. So all of this was starting to jive really well for the story of America and the design of this monument and the location. The next step was just fundraising. So she's conceived as a gift to the US, but also there was some unrest in France at the time. Napoleon III was running a tyrannical regime, and the Enlightenment movement was resisting it. So they were able to raise the money, and this was the billboard sort of poster that they used to raise the money. They erected a life-size bust in Paris, and at the 1817-8 exposition, and that's how they were really able to promote the idea and raise the money. The actual process of building the statue is incredible. I'm not going to dwell too much on it because I know we're short on time, but basically she starts off as a small scale figure that is scaled up 3 times, and each time she's scaled up, they use this technique called repousser, which basically transcribes in 3 dimensions plaster casts of each scale figure, and is basically the tool that enables them to scale her up accurately to the current scale. And then after the funds are raised, she's constructed in Paris in 1883. So this is we're reaching about 30 years after his initial trip to Egypt. Construction begins. The interior pylon structure was constructed by none other than Mr. Eiffel, the guy that designed the Tour Eiffel. And it's a pretty phenomenal structure itself. It's concealed. Obviously, nobody can see it unless you go up through the statue. But it's a pretty cool structure. It's a truss that has springy members that basically attach the robes and the head and the feet, and that allow her to be weather friendly, because the island is so exposed to the elements. It's exposed to storms, to heavy winds, to rains, and so the structure itself needs to be able to expand and contract to absorb movements. And so this is just a cool image of the pieces being shipped to the US, where they were assembled on the island and finally erected. She's unveiled in 1886 and becomes an instant icon. And then this is just a juxtaposition of the initial sketch in Egypt and then the current rendering. And you can see some changes. He's flipped the arms that are lifted. He's flipped the legs that are standing forward. Instead of an open hand, she's carrying a book. But there are many similarities, which you can also see for yourself. This is me very excited standing next to a bronze cast of her foot, which, fun fact, if she were to be a real shoe size, her shoe size would be number 879. And I will leave you with that.